she said, I'm tired of all these banking demos. Do you have something more interesting? And I said to her, well, have you ever thought of starting a business? And she said, yeah, actually, I had at one point wanted to create a flavored water business, a company to sell flavored water. And I said, great, flat or sparkling. She said both. And I took it out. I put 3 sentences into my iPad. And what came out was amazing. First of all, it goes to our intellectual property, which knows nothing about flavored water, but knows a tremendous amount of how workflows work and how customers should be engaged. So it knows, for example, that if you're going to be doing something, you need a set of objectives you're trying to achieve. You're going to execute through a series of stages and steps. Those are the workflows. You're going to have to connect to different backend systems. You're going to have to do certain record keeping. You might want to have certain user experiences that come out and are generated. And literally in under 10 minutes, asking a couple of questions along the way, it basically designed her business.
Today on Customer Land, I have the honor and privilege of speaking with Alan Trefler, who is CEO at Pega. And for me, this is kind of a milestone because I've spoken with a lot of people at Pega over the years. Of course, everybody points to Alan for one reason or another as the leader and kind of giant brain behind it. I know you would dispute that, but for all those reasons and more, I'm honored that we finally get to talk. So thanks, Alan.
Well, thank you for having me. I would say they mostly point to me to blame me for something.
There was that.
There's no prevalent reason.
Oh, well, one of the things that I love about these kinds of conversations, especially with people like you who sit at the top of their organizations, and even more so sit at the top of a space that I think gives you perspective that's really unique. You get to see a lot of stuff that a lot of other people, frankly, a lot of other people who are pushing the buttons and pulling the levers and, actually doing the work don't get to see. We're very task oriented down at this level. On the other hand, you get to see trends and paths and potholes and potential risks and hazards that probably a lot of people just don't get to. So I'm very interested in your perspectives from that level. But maybe just to lead off the conversation, and for people who may not know, could you tell us just a little bit about what Pega is doing in the marketplace right now?
Sure. So Pega is a 5,500 person company. We're very technical. We're very much involved in building technology aimed at sophisticated clients. And the technology falls really into 2 main buckets. On one bucket is that we support workflow automation. That is, how do you capture the workflows that make up a business or that describe the relationship between a customer and a company, perhaps? And then how do you put in reliability and predictability and automation into that as much as possible? And the second part, which is related, is how can you use real-time decisioning powered by a variety of statistical and machine learning type concepts and measures to make great decisions and then to reevaluate and do the next best action in those workflows so you get both great decisions and great execution. And we do this for about 750 of the world's most sophisticated companies. Our customer base tends to be very large firms, often global, or large government agencies. And, I think what that gives is me the perspective of trying to look at this set of problems in this world from our clients' perspectives, which is a whole nother vantage point, looking at them and their different business choices, technological choices, the different values they're trying to promote, from agility to reliability, and how can you use this decision-making technology and this operational workflow technology to do a great job? And how does AI now empower you to think differently about that?
I'm really interested in your perspectives on those things, but let's put it into a little bit of context. You're you're competing against all kinds of giant companies, and I'm thinking of Salesforce and a few others um, that are offering very sophisticated solutions, and yet you seem to be winning. I mean, your
We're doing
recent,
pretty well. Yes.
yeah, and I don't say that as if I can't believe it's not. No, you're winning because you are doing some things very, very right. So can you elaborate on that? What what's behind the wins, if I could ask it that way?
Well, we're public, so our financial results are public. And we just saw our growth rate tick up a little bit in the last quarter. And what I would attribute it to is the really creative application of generative AI through something we call Blueprint to how we handle both elements of the business, how to be able to allow a customer to have a business problem, a business challenge, a business objective, and literally engage with our Blueprint agent to be able to redesign their processes. And then also how to have the agent figure out when it's a customer related issue or customer related engagement, how they should engage with clients, what sort of types of offers they should make, how they should present them, how they should think about them. This Blueprint capability we have really walks on both sides of that decision making and execution line, and it's really jazzed up our customers and prospects a lot.
So tell us what it does. What is it? How does it work?
Well, actually, it's interesting. It's free and available to anybody at pega.com/blueprint. And what you do is you put in a description of a business. I'll share you a story. I was with the COO of a big Nordic bank, and I was going to tell her you're talking about what we did. And she said, "Can you show me?" And I said, "Yes, let me show you this." Because took out my iPad and went to do it. And she said, "I'm tired of all these banking demos. Do you have something more interesting?" And I said to her, "Well, have you ever thought of starting a business?" And she said, "Yeah, actually, I had at one point wanted to create a flavored water business, a company to sell flavored water." And I said, "Great, flat or sparkling?" And she said, "Both." And I took it out. I put 3 sentences into my iPad, and what came out was amazing. It first of all, it goes to our intellectual property, which knows nothing about flavored water, but knows a tremendous amount of how workflows work and how customers should be engaged. So it knows, for example, that if you're going to be doing something, you need a set of objectives you're trying to achieve. You're going to execute through a series of stages and steps. Those are the workflows. You're going to have to connect to different backend systems. You're going to have to do certain record keeping. You might want to have certain user experiences that come out and are generated. And literally in under 10 minutes, asking a couple of questions along the way, it basically designed her business. And she was blown away. And we get that reaction a lot. So this took something, let me tell you what the secret sauce is here. Pega has been automating workflows like that for our whole history. And we've built a system that is really comprehensive and very powerful at being able to take those artifacts, automate them, make them changeable. Our tagline is built for change, make it so that a business could run in an effective way. But historically, it could be a little tricky to learn and use. What we were able to do with the generative AI was say, hey, we're going to take our core workflow engine, which is broadly considered absolutely best in class, and we're going to teach a whole new way to explain to it what you want done. You may have heard this vibe coding stuff people talk about these days. This, I would say, we didn't model it after that because we've been doing this now for 2 years. But this is sort of a vibe way in English to describe a business objective, a business problem, or a business challenge, and have the system actually create the automation steps.
You can optimize for NPS, and that's good. You can optimize for CSAT, also good. You can optimize for loyalty, and that's good too. But here's the thing. If you're not optimizing for total customer value, for total customer profitability, then you're just optimizing for output, not the bottom line. Here's the truth. If your strategy isn't building better customers, more frequent, more loyal, more deeply bonded, then it's not a strategy, it's a performance. At Customerland Studio, we help brands find the value, find the opportunities, the force multipliers hiding inside the customer relationship. And then we help them optimize for scale, for yield, for profit across the entire relationship. Because the other thing we've learned, the only strategy that actually matters is the one that makes your customers more profitable. Customerland Studio, to make better customers. Go to customerland.net and click on the studio. Wow. So two questions. One, did that COO actually run with the business as it had been laid out? Are we going to
No,
see
but we
sparkling
succeeded. We succeeded with the system we were really trying to sell.
Well, there you go. There you go. Again, I think this is uniquely valuable coming from someone like you, but what has it been? 3 years of we're in the AI hype cycle right now, 3 years-ish, maybe 4. And Pega's been operating and building AI-based tools for whatever, I think you said 10 years-ish, more or less.
Oh, 15. I would go back to 2010.
Okay. All right. That's quite a while. So there's looking at the hype, looking at the reality. I talked to a fair number of high-level executives who I can tell are still very much caught up in the hype, which creates a heady mixture of excitement and anxiety and fear and hope. Maybe you can dispel some of that. What is the reality right now from your perspective?
So the reality depends a lot on how you do it. So first of all, we think of there as being 3 types of AI that a business and a user needs to be able to differentiate with. The first is statistical AI, which is, or machine learning, which is, hey, how do I take this pattern that I see my customers following? How do I evaluate it? How do I understand what the next best purchase or the next best offer should be for a particular customer? And that's really using math. And it's what we started with in 2010. And it's very, very popular and very powerful to be able to do that. But there's also now, to our mind, 2 different types of generative AI. One is what I would call generative AI features. So that's when you have a business application, like an application that creates sales quotes, or an application that takes complaints from a customer. And you use the AI for certain features, for maybe being able to craft a note, or maybe being able to summarize a set of interactions so they're easier to understand, or maybe to be able to do translation to a foreign language, which has now become incredibly, incredibly powerful and reliable. That's what I would describe feature sets of capabilities, are what some of the hype is about. And what I tell my customers is they're going to build some features themselves, because they're all huge companies. They're going to buy features from other companies. And we have a couple of dozen as well that we want people to acquire. So, for example, we have a feature that listens on the phone line when a call center representative talks and figures out from what's being said what it should fill in on the screen for the person to then just be able to approve it. It's a case where it's an assisted sort of discussion. So the second type was features. But the third type, which I don't see anybody else doing, is actually using the AI to reimagine and redesign the process itself. So to be able to get the customer to describe their business problem, and from that description of the business problem, be able to say, hey, This is the way you want your flavored water company to work. You're going to need chemists. You're going to need delivery trucks. If it's direct to consumer, you're going to have the setup to be able to do the mailing and the postal and all those other sorts of bits. And being able to use AI to really design and plan is very, very powerful. However, that's where those big companies like Microsoft have gone wrong. Because what they say is you should create agents that are going to figure things out and do them. You want to create an agent based on prompts, based on a textual description of what you want. And then based on that agent, it's going to go do stuff for you. So, maybe it will decide whether it wants to pay a claim in an insurance company, or maybe it will decide, whether it should authorize a certain procedure based on certain rules and regs. They'll tell you to do that with agents. And what we say is, no. You might have some agents as type 2, that center type, to do maybe a summarization, because that's safe, that's controlled, that's limited. But in terms of the actual process, the actual complex thing you're actually doing for your business, you cannot do that over and over again when you're interacting with it. You should do that in advance. You should create the library, as it were, of process definitions and workflows, as we call them, that allow you to describe how you want to work with your customers. And by creating those in advance, by doing your reasoning in advance, what you're able to do is look at it and make sure it does what you want. And you can show it to an auditor, or you can show it to a regulator. And you can have confidence that if two people come in, that they'll get treated in a fair and same way. But you can get all the inspiration and power that you get from having the language model there. We're the only people who have a workflow engine that we sit in front of, as opposed to what the others are doing, is they're just turning things over to the language model. And they're saying, hey, solve this for me. I mean, you never do this. If you were running a business and you were like paying insurance claims, which is one of our use cases that we do for a bunch of our customers, and you hire a really, really smart person, smart as a language model, you wouldn't just sit that person down and say, hey, here's a stack of your claims, go pay them. You'd say, hey, we've got policies and procedures and other types of things. And by the way, we've interpreted them for you. You've got a workflow that you could follow. And you've got decision frameworks around when you make certain decisions and when you don't. The danger with just turning it over to the model is candidly, the models are very, very sensitive to small variations of the data. And just because a company, customer had a particular variation in their experience or was different, those might not be the reasons that you want a different outcome. So by doing that reasoning at design time, you eliminate the foibles. And the reason we could do it is we had already this super powerful set of engines, this runtime engine for workflow and this runtime engine for decisioning, that we could learn to feed and make it easier to build and design, as opposed to saying, hey, I'm going to start generating code and other sorts of things. The trouble with all this code generation a lot of these guys do, it's very hard to go back and change the code. Yeah, it might be easy to spit something out, but you want to go back a couple months later, you want to change something? How do you know what you're changing on anything that's big? If small stuff or stuff that doesn't have to be predictable and reliable, I love them. We use the engines all the time when we're doing creative exercises, or we're trying to figure out the name,
right,
or names for product. It could even be very, very creative. Or we'll say we don't know how to we have a product that says this. We don't know what to call it. Give me 10 names that are copyrightable, and bang, you have it. It's amazing. You have it in seconds, but it's being interpreted by a knowledge worker. It's not actually leading to outcomes direct for the customer, or that might affect the customer. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm trying to interpret that, and tell me if I'm anywhere close to right on this. If your systems second system, generative AI, call it features and applications work.
Yep.
I understand it. That's probably 99% of what I see out there. But the more interesting conversations, I think, have to do with what you're calling the third scenario, which, again, this is my interpretation. What I think I heard you just say is that the more interesting and maybe even more appropriate use of these engines is their ability to rethink, redesign, and reimagine the systems rather than
Themselves.
just being applications for task work. Do I have that anywhere near close?
Yeah, you do. And tying them together and making it all work, making it visual, collaborative, et cetera.
So let me ask you something. I can see an awful lot of people being really intrigued by this tool, and props to you and your team for coming up with the idea. But it might be one of the very best lead gen tools I've ever seen. I don't know if it's really effective for you that way, but it seems like it would be.
Well, our customers tend to be uh, pretty good sized companies, and so a lot of what we do is we go and we call on them. But what this has done, this has completely changed the way our salespeople engage with customers. A salesperson used to engage with the customer around like slides, and they'd go, 4 or 5 meetings often to be able to get a right to have a more technical person come back with a custom demonstration, et cetera. Now, every salesperson can do a real demo of something that's almost shockingly good in the first meeting, and it's specific to that customer.
Yeah.
It's exactly, and by the way, if we had put your website in, it would go out and scrape your website and get all sorts of information about you that it would use for the construction. So this idea of using AI to rethink a process at its core, as opposed to either using it only for features. The features are good, but you don't just want to use it for features. You want to sort of rethink and re-envision and reimagine what you're trying to do. And I think that's revolutionary, and it's something that at this point is unique to us.
So one of the things that occurs to me is like, first of all, there were very few sentences you used to kick off this whole process. Create a business podcast, I think, and a few other parameters. Which is, so it's remarkable that it could spit this out just in terms of the complexity and completeness of it. On the other hand, the thing that occurs to me is, so many people, I've done this, and other entrepreneurs that I know kind of approach business ideas, concepts this way, is you layer in everything you can think of into your plan. But what ends up happening almost by default and fairly unexpectedly a lot of times is you're not really allowing yourself to think beyond the bounds of what you already know. And here you just put in a couple of prompts, and this machine went and looked at the entire universe of possible outcomes and came back with something that you couldn't as a human team conceive of.
And what it does, partially because of the way that our engine goes out repeatedly and looks to sources, is it really tries to get it to be state of the art. What are other people doing? What could we be doing? Remember, if you upload information about what you're currently doing, it will try to take what you're currently doing and enhance it. It's not going to be bound by what you're currently doing. The whole idea, I think this whole idea of first, I'm going to sort of map my as is, whether it's a customer journey or something that my business is doing, and then I'm going to try to envision a to be. This just blows that up. You just put your objectives in.
It really does.
It actually takes you right to the to be. People are pretty stunned by this. It's really, I think, game changing. And we just introduced something really I'm excited about called partner branded blueprints. So we went out to some of our big partners, companies like Amazon Web Services, Cognizant, Ernst & Young, Accenture, and a set of them 11 of them, have agreed to put their intellectual property into a private database that only they can see. And when one of those people, when a salesperson or a person from that consultant from the company goes to one of their customers, they and only them have access to their blueprint IP. So if they know something about how a particular type of business is supposed to work, or they have best practices that they've developed, they can put that in the database. And when Blueprint grinds these together to re-envision the process, it will take what we do, which has a lot of workflow knowledge. It will take what the internet thinks, because it will go out and ask general questions of the internet, and then it will take that particular partner's IP and grind them all together. And the partner and only the partner can use that in conjunction with that customer. And I think this is going to be next year, as this really starts to get rolled out in anger. I think that's going to be really interesting in terms of letting us not just empower our own selves to add value to our customers, but to enable our partners to add value to their customers using our engine as the technology.
Extend that out a little bit, and there's a lot of fear we've just created in the ranks of the consultancy world because, facetious, yes, but they just became 100x more powerful in what they can do.
Well, they are, and it's interesting because the whole consulting business is under enormous pressure, especially with some of this AI. And you see businesses that say we want to try to reassert more control. We want to try to be, independent of some of the traditional consultancies there. And you can also see them trying to write code on by themselves with some of these very powerful co-pilots and coding tools that exist to help people write computer programs. This, I think, gives the consultants something of a weapon to fight back with, because they can go into one of their customers and say, look, I can bring you my intellectual property, which I've developed over a long period of time. I can marry it with your definition of your problem. And I can get something done 4 or 5 times faster than we ever could have done before. Now, the fact that it just happens to run on Pega, and to actually execute it, they'll have to run it on a Pega system. We don't make them execute it on our system. If they wanted to take what this generated and recode it all by hand, they could. But that would be, I think, kind of foolish when this actually becomes a state-of-the-art running system with screens and back ends and interfaces and agents. Everyone's talking about agents. This generates an agent that I can converse with. And you don't have to do any of that in the manual way. So that's, to me, what the superpower of AI is.
Yeah, that's a big deal. One of the themes that has, and I just said that's a big deal and then skipped right over it. No, that's a really big deal. One of the themes that keeps bubbling up, and I don't see a real cadence to this, but it just keeps showing up somehow, is the idea of trust in AI and how it gets dealt with from a user standpoint. How much do we really want to trust these machines? But from a development standpoint, how much trust can you and how do you bake trust into how these things think and what their outputs are? And I had a really healthy conversation, beginnings of a healthy conversation with Rob Walker on that. But I'd love to hear from your perspective as the leader of the company. How, first of all, do you see it as an issue? Maybe that's just something that is.
Oh, I think it's a huge issue. I think there's trust. I think there's making sure that the company and its tools are delivering value in ethical ways, because there's lots of information AI can use that candidly violates the law. And that's why we think it's so important to have this intermediate stage where you use the AI to design what your business should do. But then when you execute, when you're making the lending decision, when you're making any decision, you need to be able to see how it came to that decision and why it did it. And it's Rob talks about transparency, which I think is really key. This style of using AI is very transparent. Additionally, we have to complement that with we have agreements with our AI providers where no client data is used for training, so they don't have to worry that either we or the AI company will train on their data. And all of the data is encrypted and belongs to them. So those are the assurances our customers have required of us all along, as they've trusted us with their information, and we've now extended that to our use of AI. So absolutely, trust is critical.
When you're in these conversations and when your business development team are in these conversations, the idea of trust always has to come up. It just will, I think. But it seems to me that at this phase in the game, and I'd love your perspective on this, saying that we have addressed trust issues by doing A, B, and C is kind of a check the box. And not to diminish anything you're doing at all, because I think it's spot on. But do you get pushback in these situations by saying, yeah, but really, or yeah, but how do we know? In other words, how significant is trust really perceived as by some of these big companies? Are they really concerned, or is it more of just I need to check that box?
No, I think they're very concerned. They understand the level, and they're correct in the level of reputational risk that could exist from doing something untrustworthy. That's why, what we do is we use the AI to create a very creative and curated experience for their customers, as opposed to creating the outcome for their customers. I think there's a lot of anxiety, well-placed anxiety, that if you over-delegate to the AI at the wrong time, you're not going to have predictable outcomes. And we actually talk about predictable AI as being the way we want to be perceived and seen. And, it's done through a variety of ways relative to both the technical infrastructure, to the contractual infrastructure that we strive, to the audits we support when customers want to see how certain things work. So I think it's a very big deal for our clients, given who they are.
Yeah, some very big names. I'm privy to at least a part of your client list, and they're very, very big names with a lot of exposure out there.
And everyone is terrified, I think appropriately, of being the next headline. So.
Right. Yeah, nobody needs that. So we're in a very rapidly changing AI environment right now. It would be completely unfair of me to ask you what you think this space will look like in 5 years. So I'm not going to do that. But let's bring it back home a little bit. Let's say 2 years. Let's say a year, because if I know Pega at all, I know you've already built the roadmap for what that's going to look like in a year and beyond. So without giving away too much of the secret sauce, what do you think we're looking at?
So I think you're looking at ever more complete ability to apply this AI technology safely in businesses. We've really focused on the safe, predictable application. I think you're going to see a bifurcation between companies who did things in ways that weren't safe and have to stop at the experimental phase. That's why people talk about so many of these systems never really make it to production. It's not because the AI doesn't work. It's by its nature. The AI that they're using and the way that they're using it subjects them to a lack of predictability. So I think you're going to see some shakeouts here as we go as we go forward. The level of hype around the words AI, the words agentic, is embarrassing. As a technologist, I find it embarrassing. But there's no choice. You have to use those words, and it's going to do really important things. It's it's not going to. Maybe we'll cook dinner for you when Elon gets his robot working. But it has some things it does incredibly well, but you got to use the right AI in the right place, and that's where we've really tried to focus on When do we want to be statistical? Well, you want to be statistical when you need to be able to say exactly how you came to a decision. You can be generative, particularly when you're kind of designing your business, because you don't have to explain that to somebody.
Right.
The miracle can just happen. And knowing when to use which is really important. And the thing that makes it complicated is there are some pieces of generative that are completely predictable. If you wanted to translate a word, or you wanted to be able to summarize a document, the AI does that incredibly predictably. You can rely on that. If you wanted to, as we were just doing or talking about, redesign the way you want to engage with the customer, use the AI to tell you. But then you better look at it and make sure that it really matches what you want to do.
So I was waiting for you to say something like it's all hype. We should be avoiding buying AI-based stocks right now, but we're not going to say that because we don't need to do that as a stock market. But I'm very keen to keep an eye on how Pega, being one of the leaders in this space, and I think one of the best big thinkers in this space, continues to think about AI, because I think we all have something to learn there.
Well, I'm glad to both keep thinking and keep sharing. I will tell you, I never give stock advice. I always think that's a really bad thing to do. But the thing I think we will see is that there inevitably will be shakeouts, and that's just the way it goes. But our use of AI, we're already seeing the results, and our customers are telling us that we've made it much easier for them to envision how they should improve their processes and decisions. And that's what it is really for us. Can we use the AI to impact that creative process that historically needed to be done through training or by hand, and now be able to do that assisted? And there's no question that this blueprint technology helps do that in a big way.
I think the word you just used, the phrase, the idea that that these technologies can be used to help other companies envision what could be, is the big deal. I really do, and I'm excited to keep looking at this. Well, Alan, I've enjoyed this. I'm glad that I pursued your schedule as hard as I did, and really can't wait until we can do it again. Maybe another 6 months or a year next time you have an opening.
Oh, excellent. I'd be happy to, and there'll be more to show and more to talk about, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Well, Alan, thanks again. I'm going to post a link to the Pega Blueprint tool, which is fascinating. It's too bad this isn't a visual medium, because if you had seen what I had seen. But again, thanks a million, Alan. Really appreciate it.
Take care, Mike.